When someone shows up in my office and we start working together, I get really, really curious of like, how are they holding pleasure in their whole lives? They're doing things that look like they're treating their bodies well, but they're actually sort of doing it more out of angst or more out of pressure, like I'm supposed to be doing it. What's true about pleasure is the feeling of should really removes us from our ability to track pleasure, to feel pleasure in our bodies, to relax into pleasure, to feel the intuition that arises from pleasure that tells us where we need to be going in our erotic worlds to get the most out of our pleasurable experiences.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner, and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. I am a dating and relationship coach, a boundaries and communication expert, and I have written 3 books. My last book was just published recently, and it's called Love at Last: True Stories of Falling in Love Later in Life. And this is a collection of 18 stories of people who found love later in life. Each story is accompanied by all the love lessons that each of these couples learned to help them get to where they are today. Many of them are my clients. Some of them were podcast guests, and others were people who were strangers to me. Each story is really inspirational. So you can find all of my books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Just look up Sandy Weiner, author, and you'll find them all. Before I bring on my guest, I want to invite you to join Your Last First Date. That is my Facebook group. It is a unique space for women over 40 who are seeking positive support on their journey to lasting love. I have 7 awesome monitors who help me keep this group safe and sane, which is rare in the world of online communities for single people. So join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest. Do you want to have more satisfying, intimate relationships? Well, you're in luck because my podcast guest, Keeley Rankin, is a sex and relationship coach. She helps individuals and couples shed shame, access pleasure, and step into their authentic and real erotic selves. She has 2 online courses, Keeley Sex Class and Premature Ejaculation Training Mastery Course, and she mentors and supervises up and coming sex coaches, and she facilitates workshops for colleagues and for the general public. I just wanted to give a warning to our audience here that we are going to be talking about a sensitive topic. Intimacy, it's not for little ones. So if you're in a place with people who should not be hearing this conversation, just be forewarned. Welcome, Keeley, to the podcast. I'm so happy to
Thank
have you.
you. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Sandy. I'm excited to dive into this juicy topic.
Yeah, so, intimacy comes up a lot in my practice as a dating coach, a relationship coach. When I first started this work, I thought I was just going to help people have better online profiles and date better and be a better date. And then the more you work with people, the more everything comes up, from money to sexuality to everything. And so, first, I just want to ask you how you ended up in this field, because
Mhm.
it's not something everybody does.
Yes, it is not. Although it's getting much, much more popular, which I'm excited to know that it's all spreading. But so my story goes that when I was a young person in high school, I could easily discuss anything around sexuality, intimacy, from the most obscure to something really simple like how to kiss. And so I became sort of like the person in my cohort where people would come and ask me things about birth control or this and that. And at that same time, I was also a horse rider, a competitive horse rider. And I had always thought in my head that was what I was going to do with my life. I was going to ride horses professionally. I wanted to ride in the Olympics. So after I graduated from undergrad, I actually moved back east, was riding with Olympic level riders, and very quickly felt like this wasn't my calling. I was passionate. I could feel the passion inside of me. I just felt like the horses wasn't quite it. And so I closed that part of my life down, came back, did some soul searching, went back and got my master's degree. And the whole time that I was moving through the space of this question of like, what do I want to do with my life? I kept feeling this call into the realm of sexuality, into the realm of intimacy, into helping people with their hearts and their bodies and their expression. And so I feel like that beginning part of my life where I was helping people, being this sort of like, teenager answering questions of teenagers just followed me through as I was doing all this soul searching. And I was like, yeah, this stuff around sex, like I love it. I'm curious about it. I'm passionate about it. And it fits my personality. For anybody who knows me well, they're like, yeah, that's a perfect fit for you.
Interesting. I think that often we have hints of who we are to become much earlier than we think, even though we don't have words for it. Like you didn't think, oh, I'm going to become a sex expert when I'm 14, but who even knew that this was a career. But I
Yes, it
think,
wasn't back then. It was not
right,
even really an option.
you were like the first sex education, the show is Sex Education.
Right.
You were
Yes.
like that person who
Right.
just understood it. You don't, it's like an intuitive thing, I think. I mean, I personally, we didn't have anybody like that in my very religious all girls
Mm.
school that nobody was talking about things
Right.
like that. But me and my friends were. I mean, we were
Mm.
all curious, and I have very vivid memories of friends who were the most sexually sex positive, very
Mm.
curious. Those are the people that you could talk about everything to.
Right.
And so they were lucky to have you, and we're lucky to
Mm.
have you here
Thank
today.
you.
So let's talk about some of the struggles.
Mhm.
A lot of people really struggle in this area. So why
Yes.
do they struggle? What are the struggles?
Yes. Yes. And I think it's worth reiterating. Many, 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 many people struggle with their eroticism, their sexuality. And I often think about it as their relationship with pleasure. So when someone shows up in my office and we start working together, I get really, really curious of like, how are they holding pleasure in their whole lives? How are they letting themselves do pleasurable things? Are they doing the yoga class and doing the community outings, but there's this rigid schedule around it and they're doing it to kind of like, I've got to get this thing done. And so it seems like it's within pleasure. They're doing things that look like they're treating their bodies well, but they're actually sort of doing it more out of angst or more out of pressure, like I'm supposed to be doing it. And what's true about pleasure is the feeling of should, which is a shame, and I've got to do this thing, and other people and comparing myself, expectations really removes us from our ability to track pleasure, to feel pleasure in our bodies, to relax into pleasure, to feel the intuition that arises from pleasure that tells us where we need to be going in our erotic worlds to get the most out of our pleasurable experiences.
Interesting. I've often noticed that when it comes to food in particular, people are very withholding and they don't have pleasure, especially
Right.
women. I
Right.
think women were programmed to be thin
Mhm.
and to really not enjoy their food.
Mhm.
And I think it's the same with intimacy. There are a lot of shoulds, especially in long-term relationships where
Mhm.
you're trying to keep the peace and you feel that you have to have a schedule to make the spouse happy.
Mhm.
And then it's all joy
Mhm.
leaves the room.
Right.
And I'm sure that that has led to the end of a lot of
Mhm.
relationships. And so, what can people do to change their relationship with
Mhm.
pleasure and intimacy?
Yeah. So I think the very, very first thing of any change that we're trying to make is to just be able to acknowledge that it's what's real. So the first step is noticing, oh, I may not have the best relationship with pleasure, or I may struggle to connect with pleasure, or I may put pleasure on the back burner and put other things first. So I think the first step in any transition is to acknowledge. Now, one of the things that I've created recently is a new course. It's called Keeley's Sex Class, and I walk people through the pathway that I believe builds the capacity and the space to be in this more pleasurable arena and to enjoy pleasure more fully. And the whole course actually sort of is structured to take someone from a place where they may not be sure or may have a lot of questions or feel really disconnected from their erotic world, and step by step walking you through how do you transition into this place where you can deepen and find more comfort. And the first place that I start with people is actually mindset. It's sort of like deconstructing all of these wild and horribly socially constructed ideas about what pleasure is, deconstructing the comparisons, which we talked about a little bit about, looking at our histories. If we grow up really religious, there's a lot of things, a lot of stories we are told about pleasure and our bodies and what we're supposed to want and what is okay. Society gives us all sorts of messaging. You had that the great reflection about food and women and the relationship with food. I mean, there's so many things that are happening under the surface that really impact our ability to start to listen to our bodies and get connected with all these pieces. So it is quite a journey, I think, for many, many people to get connected with their pleasure. And it's meant to be a fun one. I mean, at the end of it, there's really this beautiful reward of deep pleasure that no one can ever, ever take from you. Moments with yourself, with your body, moments with a loved one, a cherished experience. And so even though it can feel like work at times, and it is some effort, at the end there really is this amazing reward, which is, in my mind, nothing is more worth it than that.
Yeah, I agree. And so, kind of almost like journaling, like just acknowledge what's really real for you and what the struggle is,
Mhm.
and start to look at where it originated from
Mhm.
and how you think about pleasure, how you think about intimacy,
Mhm.
and creating new relationships with our bodies, with our intuition, with our sense of fun. I mean, God,
Right.
people don't have fun.
No, no. And eroticism is adult play. I mean, it truly, really is at its essence. It's playing. It's playing with yourself. It's playing with another person. But it gets wrapped with so many other parts that it's hard to feel the core essence of the playfulness. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a lot of people in our practice who are over menopausal age. And so as people are aging, sometimes their desire changes,
Absolutely.
their bodies change,
Absolutely.
there's pain during
There can be.
intimacy.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions for people who are feeling less turned on because of aging?
Yeah. So I think I just want a blanket statement saying, I talk about this a lot in the course we just created. Our eroticism is always shifting and changing. And if we hold ourselves hostage to believing that what we liked when we first started to connect with our eroticism, or our hormones first started kicking in and we started having those urges, we are going to spend a life feeling like we're trying to catch up. We're not really in the moment. And so I think there's a part of, I feel like I could get like a soapbox and be out there, like, screaming this into a microphone. But we've got to get out of this idea that we figure out something about our eroticism and it never changes. It's always evolving. Our bodies are always evolving. Our emotional needs are always shifting. Our fantasies are always changing. And we want to remain in this curious, open space. And I think it can feel really difficult for people as things start to change, especially with something so hormonal like menopause, where it actually changes a lot of components inside of the body from a hormonal place. It's like if we haven't built that capacity to have the curiosity, there can start to feel like, oh no, what do I do? How do I figure this out? How do I find more pleasure? And so I often think about it coming back to like looking at how are you thinking it's supposed to be? How can we step away from like let go of that? Like it's not supposed to be any particular way. What it's meant to be is pleasurable. So, can we get curious about all sorts of things that we know about pleasure, ways to touch, ways to be in contact, things we might want to hear, and start to include all of those in there to allow the erotic experience to be more pleasurable? And then there's some, things that I think for most people I think pretty well known, is like most women are going to need more lubricant than they did when they were younger. That's just a natural part of the hormonal changes. So making sure you find a lube, take the time to find a lube, try different ones, feel good about being able to reach for that or ask for that. And so there's a big component too about learning how to communicate, which I think as we age and have sex longer, we will have to learn how to communicate more because things are going to look different.
Communication is so huge. And I mean, it's such a big part of relationships in general. And so many people don't speak up
Right.
and don't ask for what they want because it's vulnerable. And what if I don't get it? And I have a client who she's been seeing somebody for a number of years, and he made a statement about a month ago about how sex changes when you get older and it's not as exciting as it used to be. And I
Right.
was
That's
like,
hurtful. Right.
yeah, I said, first of all, it's not a request, it's not a desire to make anything change or be different. And I
Right.
said, how about we take that and talk to him about ways to make it more exciting? Like, this is a
Right.
two-person thing. This isn't just, it's not as exciting and that's the way it is. And
Right.
so, and it's hard. It's hard to talk about that, but it's so important to talk about it and not
Right.
to accuse your partner. And I've seen where one of the partners stops having desire as much. And often it's the male, we think of women as reaching menopause and their desire changing, but men also have changes in their testosterone.
Huge. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah. And then there's performance anxiety. There's all these other things that happen, which as I started dating after my divorce, I had never encountered any of these things before. And it was just like, whoa, what's happening here?
Surprise.
Right.
Right.
Welcome to the world of dating and
Yes.
performance.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and men would often say, "This has never happened to me before." And yeah,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
how do we work through performance anxiety, for example?
Yes. Hmm.
Whether it's men listening or women listening, I
Hmm.
think both people probably can
Hmm.
be contributing towards this.
Yes, when we first, so one of my subspecialties is male performance struggles. So I spent years and years and years working with tons and tons of men around performance anxiety. And what's true is that it is often related to how in the moment there's this pressure and this expectation, this anxiety, right? Where there's this feeling of, I've got to perform. This has got to look a certain way. And if it doesn't look this particular way, we come back into the comparison space, then it's not going to be fun. I think about your client and the share that her partner shared, which essentially is like he has an idea in his head of how he thinks this is supposed to be. And because it's not adding up to that, he's decided it's not as fun. And I agree with you. He wasn't coming with anything constructive, anything helpful. He wasn't even sharing his grief. I hear a lot of grief in that, of
Mhm.
how his body has changed, or maybe times where he missed opportunities. There was so much in that statement that he made to her. And one of the things with performance anxiety is that I think there's this idea with people, if they don't talk about it, that it will just go away. And I think in some cases, that is true. For some people, it does just go away. The more they spend time with someone, the more they're able to just perform. I end up working mostly with people who that's not true for. So they end up feeling like it's really impacting their capacity to get into bed with someone. And it's scaring them so much that maybe they're pushing off the erotic space, or they're choosing not to go home with someone because they don't want to feel that pressure of, will I be able to perform or not? And I think especially as we age and our bodies change and our bodies look different when we're nude, I think, we talked earlier about the eating piece and this idea that women think their bodies are supposed to look a certain way. Men also feel this way too, although I think it's slightly different in terms of the social pressure. But there can also be this feeling of like, well, I don't really want to do what's fun for me and my body because I don't want this person to see me, because I'm afraid if they really got a good look at my body, they might be turned off by me. And so there becomes this like hiding and this shutting down piece. And really the only pathway through is to talk about it. It's to talk about it with the person that you're with. So again, we're back in that communication place. And the new sex class we released has a whole dive into like, how do we start to communicate about these things and all of the different things that we need to communicate when we're in the bedroom with people. And so oftentimes I recommend for folks who do struggle deeply with performance anxiety is to let their partner know before they start. You know, if you're a woman and you struggle with um, finding your orgasm, or feeling like you can stay present, is letting your partner know, hey, just so you know, like it takes me a little while to get comfortable with someone. You don't have to give people in the beginning the whole rundown of your history and how long this has happened. And there doesn't have to be all of this information, but giving a person a sense of what they can expect, right? So if you're a person who's been dating someone and they're experiencing performance anxiety, it's great to ask them like, hey, I just want to check in, like, you know, is this normal for you? That's an okay thing to ask. And most people will be like, no, it's not normal. This has never happened before. It's okay if people aren't being fully transparent about the vulnerability that they have. I think sometimes there's this feeling of like, oh, we've got to catch them. Like they're not telling me the truth. And is that really true? And it's it's not really helpful. People feel a lot of shame about how their bodies are performing or not performing, really, I guess we would talk about. And what's most helpful is that we offer a safe place to let people know that they can relax and, just like we've been talking about here, return back to what's interesting, what's pleasurable, what's inspiring, and see if we can turn it back into play versus this performance of something that has to happen. Men in general feel so much pressure around getting hard, staying hard, and lasting for a certain period of time. If they don't last long enough, they feel emasculated. If they last too long, they feel like, oh my gosh, she's going to get mad. I mean, there is just this endless pressure that exists within that space. And women, we don't have to really work with that. You know, we can kind of just put some lube there and make it happen if we want to. Men are not able to do that. Even if they want to, sometimes there is a separation that happens. And so as anybody working through that, this communication piece of just talking about it in a loving way and getting back to, can we just be here together? Can we just enjoy and not put pressure on the situation?
Yeah, I
Without knowing
love.
more about the specifics, that's my answer. Because
Yeah, no,
everybody's a
that's
little different.
right. And I think again, communication, and also I love that you brought up grief, because I think a lot of people feel grief about the way things were and the way things aren't. And people don't have the words, especially men of a certain age who were raised without ever feeling safe to talk about feelings. And
Right.
they had to be tough, and they couldn't cry. And so
Stoic, have it
yeah,
all
very
together,
stoic.
responsible.
Yeah. And this is part of their identity.
Yeah,
And so, but shame is a huge issue for
right.
men in particular. I mean,
Mhm.
I think we all have shame around certain things, and that we need to really look at and work through. But I have just seen people getting into relationships and not telling the truth because they're ashamed of certain
Yeah,
parts of themselves.
right.
And it's so much healthier to, first of all, look at your shame and work through the shame, but really own who you are, what comes up for you, and be able to talk about it, even if it feels scary,
Yeah.
because that's how we connect. That's how
Mhm.
we create intimacy.
Right, right. Right. I often think about, when I hear the word shame and I talk about shame, I think about my late mentor, John Wellwood, who passed away a couple of years ago. And I remember one time we were sitting in a weekly group, a meditation group with him, and we were talking about shame. And he said shame, he believed, was the most difficult emotion to work with interpersonally and with clients. He was a psychotherapist. And he said, because shame inherently, the feeling of shame is inherent in wanting to hide. So when we experience shame, our first reaction is like, I've got to hide this from everyone. And it's a sense of isolation. And so it's a really tough one to break through if we don't have tools or skills or a safe place, or we've been told our whole entire lives, this is not okay. This isn't how men act. This isn't how this isn't appropriate. You're not allowed to. It's a really, really tough one to take that first step and start to move towards sharing. And I often think of it as like baby steps. We don't have to just like explode the whole thing at once. It's like just starting to let the air out of the balloon, like just starting to say, this, I feel uncomfortable right now, or I feel a little embarrassed right now. I mean, even that is so can be monumental for someone who's never felt like their opinions, feelings, needs were valid, wanted, or welcomed. It can be make a really big difference. And so I think if you're a person who's starting relationships and you sense you might be in a territory with someone like this, paying attention to just those little places and seeing those as like, we can build with that. Building a brick wall starts with each brick. So got to lay the first ones down and slowly work towards, you can, someone said, if you've noticed someone has been closed off, but then they say like, I feel uncomfortable, right? You don't have to go right for it then, but maybe a week or so later, like, hey, I remember the other night when we were in bed, you said you felt uncomfortable. Like, I'd love to know more about that when you're ready. So we open up. I think with eroticism and conversation, it's opening up the conversation, not expecting one conversation is going to get you all the way through to the end of it and you'll never have to readdress it. These are ongoing conversations where they're open-ended and they don't necessarily have an end or a resolve per se.
Yeah, I love the baby steps. I totally
Baby
agree with you.
steps.
I think that, people think it's all or nothing, and
Mhm.
it's not. And we actually
Yeah.
don't function well that way. I mean,
Yeah.
this is how I talk to my adult children. It sounds like you're frustrated by that. And then
Yeah.
some of my kids would just say, no, I don't feel frustrated. I'm fine. Everything's fine. And then 3 days later, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I'm really having a hard time with this. But
Yeah.
it's like opening that door, opening it
Right.
a little bit to see how comfortable somebody is. You're not trying to push an agenda. You're
Mhm.
not trying to pressure them,
Right.
but to create that safe space, like you said.
Mhm.
And I think you have brick by brick, you're building the safe space. Brene Brown talks about shame and vulnerability so beautifully also.
Mhm.
You mentioned your
Also great.
mentor, but yeah, I mean, I just think, you can't hide when you're being vulnerable. It's
Right.
it's exposure.
Right.
And for some people, it just feels so exposed that they can't share at all. And for other people, they're oversharing, which is also not healthy. It's a
Mhm.
boundary crossing, and it's like a codependency. It's like a whole bunch of things. But
Right.
it's like learning. When I work with clients, I have them break things down into layer one, layer two, layer three. When you're sharing about yourself, and you don't
Love that.
share the whole story, you share the first layer that the person is entitled to because you
Right.
don't know them that well. And
Mhm.
then when you're getting to know them more and there's more trust, you open up to level two, level three.
Right. 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 Which is
Yeah.
so important for people to learn that it's not like a first date. We just reveal everything about ourselves and lay it
No.
out on the table. It takes time and we want to assess safety. We want to assess compatibility. I mean, there's so many pieces we're assessing for as you deepen into those layers. And I think it is a really important thing for people dating, especially in today's day and age, because dating now is completely different than it was even 5 years ago, much less 10 or 20 years ago.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. Let's talk about dating today for a minute
Okay,
because
great.
so many people have, well, there are all these rules floating around that I
Mm,
totally don't agree with, but the people who are afraid that if they don't sleep with somebody soon enough, that the
right.
person will lose interest. And so
Mhm,
I've had so many people come to me
mm,
after sleeping with somebody and then feeling like I don't have enough trust. I don't know where we stand. I'm afraid to ask them.
mm,
So, what's your feeling about
mm.
intimacy and dating? And I know there's no blanket rule, but
Yeah.
what would you suggest people have in place so that they feel that they can be intimate and feel good about it?
When to be intimate is is such an important question. So I'm really happy we're talking about it here because for some people they can be intimate and it's actually easier for them to be in pleasure with someone that they don't know as well. Or as they get to know someone and that person gets to know them more, it becomes more vulnerable and more scary. So I think what's important to remember is that people hold intimacy in different buckets. I think about the modern romantic Western relationship is clearly it's Western because in the East there's sort of different containers. But I think of like three buckets, three circles, and they overlap. One is emotional intimacy, one is physical intimacy, and one is commitment. And so in a healthy couple, there's all three of these things are functioning and people feel good, they feel solid, they don't come into my office. When we're just getting to know someone and we're starting to date, we're assessing like how do we fit together in this modern intimacy map? Are we going to do our holidays together? Are we going to spend our weekends together? What's happening in the commitment space? How safe am I to share about my day, my worries, my joys? That's the emotional intimacy space. And what does our eroticism look like, the physical intimacy space? And so as we're dating, we're sort of assessing these pieces together because we don't really know what the other person is thinking. And we're sort of making decisions. How far are we willing to go into these spaces to, with what the information that we have? And what I found with many of the couples that I work, or many of the people that I work with that are dating, is that some need a lot more commitment and emotional intimacy to move into that physical intimacy space. And so I often think for people that are questioning these pieces or they struggle with these, they're not sure, it's like, let's actually get to know you more. Like, what do you think that you're needing in terms of commitment to feel safe? What do you need to know about that person? Do you need to have seen their house? Do you need to have had coffee with them? I mean, there's so many different components of what commitment can look like. Do you need to have gone away with them on a holiday first? I mean, there's lots of different pieces that is what commitment means to someone. And also looking at the emotional component. What do you need in terms of, oh, yeah, and the commitment also, there's the big question of like, are we boyfriend, girlfriend? Are you sleeping with other people? That's a huge part of it. I almost skipped over that. I'm in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, so there's a lot of non-monogamy here. So sometimes I skip
Mhm.
that, but that's a huge component. Like, am I your girlfriend? Are you dating or seeing other people, right? That's a part of that. And then the emotional intimacy piece is the safety. How safe am I here? And for some people, they need quite a bit of commitment and emotional intimacy. And this isn't necessarily gender split. I've worked with many, many, I think people might say, like, oh, women need more commitment or emotional closeness to be erotic. It's not, it's actually not true. And a lot of the men I've worked with who have the struggles with performance, turns out they're missing the emotional intimacy and the commitment part. And that's why they're struggling in the physical space because they don't feel secure. So, just a little piece to wrap up where we were
Mm.
before. And so I often think of like, there is no hard, fast rule. So anybody that's trying to give you a hard, fast rule of like, by date 3, this needs to happen, or anybody who's pressuring you to say that this needs to happen or I'm going to leave, it's just not a good fit. And the right person that's going to be able to hold you in all your fullness is going to want you to be earnestly interested in moving forward in the physical space. And so until there is a strong, that's what I love about the kids that are coming up now, the younger kids in their 20s. They're like, if there is not a hell yes, then it's a no.
Yeah.
That piece of consent. And so I think it's holding ourselves to a higher regard. And the other piece I'll say about making decisions around when to be physically intimate, I think sometimes there's this feeling, I've noticed it a lot more with women than men. So this is probably a bit more gendered, but they have to decide how far they're going to go before they go on the date. So I'm only going to make out, or I'm only going to do hand stuff. There's this idea that like you've got to know before you go on your date how far you're going to go in the bedroom. And I often say to people who end up in that space is like, can we just trust your body in the moment? Can you be in the experience, go on the date, and not make any commitment either way? At any point you want to stop any part of anything, you get to say, no, I'm done. I want to stop and either stay or leave. There's nothing that says once you start making out and your clothes come off that you have to go fully into an erotic experience. You get to stop at any point for any reason, no matter what. And I think that's such an important thing for people who struggle with this, like, well, once I'm in it, I got to keep going, or he's going to get mad if I decide I don't want to anymore. Like, that's irrelevant. It's your body and it's your set, it's about your pleasure and what you want to do. And so I think giving people back power to know that they can say no at any point, and also not feeling like they have to decide before the date, and to really feel their body. And if something isn't feeling right, like let's just say things have been going great, you've been on 5 or 6 dates with someone and you're thinking like, I think I'm ready, it feels like I'm more ready, and then you get into the experience and suddenly you realize you're not, that's okay too. It's totally okay. And that's where communication would be really helpful, if you can talk to the person about it. Hey, I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever reason. I have never been with anybody else other than my husband, or I haven't been with anybody in 20 years. I mean, there can be so many things going on in that moment. And you may find just disclosing that and your partner going, I totally get it. I'm here. Well, I'll be here when you're ready, may turn things around in that moment immediately, and you may feel totally different. And I mean, you also may not, but I think taking that pressure off of like, I have got to do it by a certain time, it's really, it's not helpful for anybody.
Oh man, I agree so much. I think that people have forgotten how to tap into their own intuition about what works for them and using the power of no or not right now, or this is what I need in order to feel uh, commitment, or this is what I need in order to have intimacy. I think that, just if you don't feel safe with somebody, do not do anything that doesn't feel safe to you.
Yeah.
And the partner who doesn't respect that, that's really good information to have early on, as early
Yes.
as possible.
As
If
early as
like,
possible, right?
yeah,
We're
like
still
what you,
assessing as we're dating. We're assessing
yeah,
people.
exactly. And what you just said, like saying, I'm not ready, and having somebody start to force you would be a horrible thing,
Right.
right? So somebody who respects that and says, well, thank you for letting me know. And what do you need to be ready? And how can we keep talking about this? Because I'm attracted to you. And,
Right.
just being able to say the things
Mhm.
and see how the person responds, I think is such an important part of the whole dating experience. And
Yeah.
also, I think people need to look at their patterns. Like if you have a tendency to get physically involved quickly and you find that you're getting hurt time and time again because the
Right.
person isn't responding in the way you want them to, and you're not having the relationships you're seeking, then there's a pattern that you need to change. And
Absolutely. It's such an
yeah.
important point. It's like, what have you been doing and what's not working? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Don't keep doing the same thing, expecting
Hmm.
different results.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, Keeley, I always ask this question at the end of every podcast, and that is, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
Oh, I love that. I remember my last first date with my husband. It was wonderful. I think my advice is often to raise your expectations and see the person that's in front of you.
That's a lot to say in very few words.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, don't lower your expectations
Mhm.
and settle, but also see the person and not the potential of a
Yeah.
person that is not actually sitting across from you.
Right. The
Um,
fantasy. I think we get a lot of people get
yeah,
stuck in fantasy, and then they also simultaneously sell themselves short.
yeah, the story, the love story that we want to have happen. And
Right.
And often, as you know, I just wrote in my book, Love at Last, these are stories of people who found love later in life. And so many of them had a type that they let go of. So
Yeah.
many of them let go of that immediate spark that they thought they were going to feel.
Mhm.
They met people in ways that they never expected,
Mhm.
with having the expectation that I'm going to just go out and have fun, and then
Right.
meeting people along the way. And so
Right.
they're, just really taking a look at how have I been showing up as
Mhm.
as a person dating, and what do I want to do differently? And this conversation has had so much richness about pleasure and fun and eroticism and what's possible for everybody,
Mhm.
no matter how old they are.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Keeley, tell us how our audience can find you.
Yes. So the best way to find me is either through my website or Instagram. So my website is keeleyrankin.com, KeeleyRankin. And we'll have those in the show notes below, I'm sure. And I
Mhm.
also have a special free offer for your listeners today. So if they just want to type in my website URL and then a /free, they'll find a fun free thing that's just for them. It's a little video course that I put together and I think is really, really helpful advice for relationships, but also just in general in life. So you can find it out when you get there. I'm not going to tell you more than that. Little surprise. And
Surprise.
also surprise when you get there. And then also, Sandy, for your listeners, I have a special 15% offer code for our new course that we just launched, Keeley's Sex Class, which takes you through all of these different pieces around your body and your relationship with your body, your pleasure, and different types of sex acts. Actually, we have this like great graphic that we hired this incredible man to make, and it shows all, the 5 most common sexual positions in through communication, and tons and tons and tons of pieces, about 8.5 hours of content. So we have a special discount code for your listeners, which is going to be last first date 15, and we'll have that below as well. And that 15% off code will last for a week after you launch this. So then it will expire. But it's a great course. I think people will get a lot out of it. And if you've been curious about eroticism and how to deepen into your body, it's a great offer. And it's meant for people to take, whether you're single or partnered. It's for everybody. So even if you are partnered and your partner doesn't want to take it with you, it's not a problem. There are so many things that you can take from it and learn from it. And there's a lot of exercises. So, here we're just sort of talking, and I stayed a little bit away. I had a couple of ideas where I could bring in some exercises for people to try, but a lot of the course is built in with you trying on things. It's like eroticism is learning to ride a bike. You've got to ride the bike. We can't just read about riding the bike or talk about riding the bike. You got to get out there and try things. So there's a lot of exercises that are um, all the way from the ground up. So it'll be helpful for people.
It sounds amazing. And, there's a whole world out there that most people have only touched very lightly on,
Right.
and me included. I mean, when I got divorced, I was like, whoa, there's a world out there that I knew nothing about. And now that I'm coaching people, I can also guide them to
Mhm.
the resources like yours, like your course, that can help people who are kind of stuck or
Mhm.
feeling a little bland or need a
Yeah.
little pick me up. I think this is such great information. So
Mhm.
thank you so much, Keely,
Yeah, you're very
for being
welcome.
here with me.
It was so wonderful to be here with you. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for listening today. If you love our show, please give us a high rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We'll be your best friends. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.